you need to grow, not just where your spouse needs to grow. If you really get humble before God, most of the time, He'll probably show you where you're viewing that conflict a little bit wrong. In general, when there's a conflict, there's probably one person is probably not 100% right and the other one 100% wrong. There's probably some points that each of you that are valid points. And so when you take it before the Lord, He has the ability to show you, what part of your argument is not looking at it in the right way. This allows God to have time to change the other person rather than the spouse be confronted by you. I've really been thankful over the last few years. I certainly would say early in my marriage, I didn't really do this step very much. But it really seems when I do go to the Lord and say, okay, I think, Tanya and I have an issue and I think she's wrong on this point or whatever, and give it some time, then when we finally get together, I definitely see the Lord having worked on Tanya as well. And I certainly view it from a different perspective, and God's had a chance to work on her, and oftentimes the situation is really even resolved without a huge confrontation. So that's the first thing, is to take it to God first. Then the second thing is take it to your spouse. It's important to give your spouse, give your spouse the time that you want to talk about the issue. So the way that's worded is kind of weird, but tell them up front, hey, let's talk about this issue with little Johnny, so that it gets them ready rather than, right after dinner saying, okay, we need to talk about Johnny right now. And so it just gives them some footing that they know a conversation is coming. Pick a neutral setting, shared turf. This is, I have the privilege of officing out of my house. And so, but that is my turf, right? I mean, when Tanya or the kids come in there, they're kind of in my office. And so we've really tried to stay out of there. When we need to talk, we'll either move into the living room or someplace because when it's in there, it's sort of my stuff and sort of I'm distracted by stuff in my office, or, it's not shared turf, and it just may put someone at a disadvantage. So you want to kind of pick a shared place. Focus on the issue, not the conflict. Remember, you are looking for a solution to a problem. It's not the time to address the strengths or weaknesses of the individual. This one is sort of hard to get past sometimes. If one person is much more emotional about the issue, and the other person is sort of analytical about it, it's probably easy to start getting into personalities, like, why are you crying about this issue? There's a simple solution. Let's just go do it. Well, that's focusing on the individual versus what the conflict is actually over. On the D part, no accusations. You spend too much time doing this. Or if you just knew what was going on with your kids, they wouldn't have got into this trouble, right? Yes, that's addressing the issue itself, but it's really addressing a person's character or the lack of whatever got them into that situation, right? It's not a time to start rehashing how the conflict got there. You just need to focus on the conflict itself. Okay, so how are we to speak to each other? Those are kind of some high-level ways of different conflicts, but how should we speak to each other? How we communicate during the conflict is as important as what we talk about. If you do it in a civil tone, if you're loving and helpful, that's going to strengthen your marriage through the conflict versus just cause another dimension that you're going to have to work on later, right, in the way you talk about and communicate during the conflict. Ephesians 4:2-3 says, "Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace." And then Ephesians 5, I won't read that, 5 verses 25 through 32. But this is how we need to talk to our spouses with love and care and tenderness, even when it's a difficult subject, because the methods we use is going to determine the success of the outcome. So the first one, we must speak truthfully. When you're in the middle of a conflict, you don't need to beat around the bush. It needs to be addressed straightforward, address the real issue versus kind of side issues, and hope that your spouse gets the point. We need to be forthright, get it out in the open. Only settling part of the conflict is just going to leave the conflict open for another conflict. It's going to not be resolved fully if you don't address all aspects of it. I guess we sort of got him locked out there. God honors and anoints our speaking when it is the truth and not spoken in a mean-spirited way. Honors and anoints. So when we attempt to speak the truth and get it out there in a truthful, loving way, God can use that. He doesn't use deceit. He doesn't like it when we try and game the system. But if we're just open and honest, that's good. And God can work on the other person to receive that in the manner it was intended. You know, we've all said things, what we think is the truth, but it comes across and either hurts the other person, or it may have been said kind of harshly, or they take it the wrong way. And so we do have to trust that when we speak openly and honestly, that God's going to allow them to hear it in the manner that we intended. On the C part, the evil one is the father of lies, slanderous, accusatory, and mean-spirited. Any talk like that comes from the evil one. Anytime we're engaged in any conversation, not necessarily a conflict, but anytime there's mean-spirited, that's not becoming of us believers. And so that's not the way God has us communicate with others. Number 2, we must speak lovingly. On the A part, truth without love is brutality, and love without truth is hypocrisy. I really like the way that is worded. Truth without love is brutality. I mean, you can say the truth, but man, you can be brutal sometimes, you know? And if you think about how we relate to our kids, especially as they're kind of forming their picture of parents and who God is, you know, if we're just brutally honest, they can really take that the wrong way if it's not presented in love. And then if we love without being the truth, then we're just kind of a facade. That's hypocrisy. We can speak the truth gently or harshly. The truth is the truth, but the impact of our words will be very different depending upon our tone of voice and our body language. There was a statistic, I wish I had the actual numbers, but it's when studies have shown when you're communicating with someone, the person hears about 7% of the words that you're using. It's like 40% of the tone of voice, and then body language is the majority of how.
That's why I never understand 7%.
That's right. It's 7% of the words that you're paying attention to. So it really is the whole package when we communicate. How we say it is even more important than the actual words and the communication that takes place. and how we handle our body language. On the D part, speaking in love takes into account how the other person will perceive the truth, looking at it from their perspective. This is I think one of the hardest things to teach your kids is think about how they're going to receive it. They think they can just say whatever's on their mind, and it's like, okay, well, that may be the truth, but think about if you're in their shoes, how would it sound? How's it going to come across in this situation, and is there a better way you could phrase it? On number 3, we must speak compassionately. Forgive each other even when you don't feel like it. Remember, you're in a marriage. This is something that you've committed to this person. And so there'll be times you may not have gotten your way in that conflict resolution, but we need to forgive and move on because it's not really based on our feelings. It's based that we have a covenant relationship, and we're going to keep that covenant. What if the shoe was on the other foot? What if the example here is what if you lost all of your credit cards, right? If your spouse did something, wrecked the car, rather than get all upset about that, what happens if that would have been your accident, right? Is to put yourself in their shoes, and it's a little easier to maybe not come down hard on someone when you think that if it happened to you. Because if you don't, next week it'll probably be you losing your wallet or losing your purse, right? On the C part, you two are now one. When you harm your spouse, you are harming your marriage. That's really something that's kind of hard to remember sometimes is, we could try and kind of punish our spouse, but what we're really doing is we're harming our marriage. And we're harming ourselves when they're unhappy or they're hurt. That really should be our hurt as well, because we are one now within the marriage. On the D part, resolution to conflict can and does bring you closer as a couple when it's done properly. That's sort of human nature. We seem to learn more through the difficulties that we face. If everything was perfect, how would you ever know to be grateful, right? If you got everything you wanted, would you ever really be thankful for what you do have, right? So it's when we have conflict or struggles or difficulty is where we can do the most growth. And the same is true for our marriage. We can certainly benefit from that, from handling conflict in the proper way, let's say it that way. Okay, these are the rules that we should not do. So these are what we would call don't rules in how to engage in conflict resolution. So the first one is don't compare your spouse to someone else's. The example here is so-and-so's wife would let him stay out late, or she gets to go shopping. Comparison is a killer on almost every front. When we start to compare either ourselves with someone else or our spouse to someone else, you're always going to pick something where